Watson has been working in supporting persons with high support needs, people with intellectual disabilities, and she is, I think, the best expert for us to introduce us into this very slippery area in a very practical way. So.
Very slippery. And it's a real privilege to come after you, Amita. I watch you from afar all the way down there in Australia. So thank you. And thanks to Gerard for facilitating me to be here. So what I want to talk about is how we can realise Article 12 for everyone. We know that the spirit of the Convention is that it is for everyone. However, there is some people who we might describe as communicating informally or perhaps unintentionally, who I think are sometimes put in the too hard basket. So my work in recent years has been around supporting people who communicate in this way to have their preferences heard within supported decision-making practice. So what do I mean by informal communicator? What I'm talking about people, well, we all communicate informally, but I'm talking about people who predominantly communicate using facial expression, maybe eye contact, might be their breathing rate, their rate of breath might change, and they also might use behaviours that challenge some people. You know, that terrible term, challenging behaviour, I'm sure you've heard about it. So these people are communicating, the people that I'm talking about, the people that are in my research are informal communicators. They're communicating informally. They might also be communicating unintentionally. And what I mean by that is that they're communicating without purpose, without an understanding that their communication will have an impact. It is indeed communication though, because people who know and love them, people who know them well, react to that communication, respond to it. So it's a bit of a tricky concept, and I haven't got time to talk about it in detail, but that's what I'm talking about here. We all may find ourselves, and we all communicate unintentionally and informally. When I roll over in bed when the alarm clock goes off and I don't want to get up, my partner knows by my groans and my that I don't want to get up, or it's time for him to make me a coffee. Which he does. But I'm not doing that intentionally. I'm just responding to how my body feels. So there are people that are communicating in this way, and they're people that also have a right to the realisation of Article 12. So what we do know is that communication is power. When we can communicate well, when we can articulate well, we're at the top of that food chain. Communication, the more likely... Sorry, I haven't moved that slide, have I? Where's this clicker thing? Just the middle one? Yes. No. No, the battery's low. Is there a way on here?
Yeah, you can just use the arrow keys.
Oh. Arrow down. Okay, thank you. Sorry, everyone. I do have a PhD, apparently. Which... This says arrow. These arrow.
Somebody said that would explain it.
That's good. Okay, so yes, communication. Communication is power. So what we do know that we're more likely to be able to live an autonomous life if we can communicate well. And within my field of speech pathology, communication theorists have spoken about this for a long time. But one of the big paradigm shifts for us in, say, I think around the 1980s was this acknowledgement that everyone can communicate, and that unintentional communication is indeed communicative, and it has value, and as much value as the symbolic or the formal communication that I'm using today to talk to you. And we need to be able to look at that human communication continuum equally, not as a hierarchy. And I think that that's what we often do for people who communicate in this way. So is self-determination a relevant concept for these people? Yes, it is. But we do know that there are many schools of thought that feel that it isn't. We still have bioethicists and other people, philosophers in the field, people like Peter Singer, who, although, you know, this was a quote from him a long time ago, I haven't spoken to him recently. He is from Melbourne originally. But I wonder whether he still holds this view. But he said in 1993, such people, it is argued, lack the capacity of reason, of self-awareness and of self-determination. These attributes define personhood, and consequently their absence means that an individual lacking them is therefore not a person. From this perspective, euthanasia for such non-persons is acceptable and indeed should be actively pursued. Not taken out of context, that is what he believed. Now, I was reading, Anna Arstein-Kerslake has just published a new book, hot off the press, and I was reading the preface that Gerard had written, and one of the things that that Gerard said in response to some of these schools of thought is this idea that people like Peter Singer may be stuck in this age of enlightenment. Gerard said, the Enlightenment probably had the largely accidental effect of narrowing down our understanding of the essence of personhood, an essence that telescoped narrowly into cognitive ability. So what Gerard is saying here is, although the Enlightenment period gave us a lot of good things, we really started to prioritise cognition or intellect as the most important thing. And as he said, there's no surprise that it was called the Age of Reasoning. So this is a quote from one of my support workers. So it's not only highfalutin people like Peter Singer that have these views, but this is a quote from one of my participants, a supporter who works with someone in my study, and she said, okay, so you're saying he can make a decision. I get it, I get what you're saying, but I'm not sure you know him, do you? I had known him for 25 years at that point. He can't tell us what he wants. We just decide shit for him. You know, no offence, but people don't know who we're dealing with here. They just can't communicate. It's different for them. They can't tell us what they want, so we just get on with it and decide and make decisions that we think are best. And there was a lot of data in my research around that with that same sentiment. So I set out to look at what supported decision-making may look like for this group of people. And I used a supported decision-making framework that I'd developed, which guided a circle of support through, it was around 3 to 6 months, through a process of supporting that person to make a decision. And just to describe a little bit about what we did, we used a lot of video. So what that video enabled us to do was to really hone in on somebody's non-verbal communication or their unintentional communication, because it allowed us to take it back as a group. We would spend days going through video of people to try and work out what their preference might be in a collaborative way. Now, see, this is the thing. How do I get this to play now?
Press another key.
Wait a minute, there we go. I reckon I can do this. And, it's not. Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
Now, this was a video taken, one of the decisions, a decision that we were focused on for this man was how he spent his weekends, how he spent his money and how he spent his time. He was telling us pretty clearly, like a lot of people who live in institutions, he lives in a group home, but it's an institution, that he was really bored on the weekends. So we started to explore with him how he might like to spend his money and his time. We made lists of things that we thought he might like to, he enjoyed. And one of those things was he loved air on his face, he loved movement, so much so that we've had, he is known to stick his head out of a car window as it's moving, which is a little bit concerning. But one of the things we thought, he'd never been to a theme park. He's 40 years old, never been to a theme park. He went to Luna Park, which is a park in Melbourne, and he had a go on the merry-go-round. We thought that this might be really difficult for him. He's usually a very stressed man. It's very hard for you to see the difference that we saw in that video. That smile, it does make me very emotional when I see that smile at the end of that video, because you never see that smile. He was very relaxed. So we thought perhaps he really enjoyed that. Let's explore that a little more. So we supported him to buy another ticket on that same ride. And then another one. And then another one. And then another one. We were there pretty much until Luna Park closed that night. Now, a lot of people would say, most people would say, Tom can't make a decision about how he spends his money. There's no question who drove that decision to spend $10 and then another $10 and another $10. So this is the kind of things that we did, or that we do. We use a lot of video to support, to try and work out what somebody might be telling us. We came up with a model of thinking about supported decision-making for people who communicate informally. And it was very clear from our thematic analysis that there was two very clear roles: the role of the person making the decision and the role of the supporter. What was very clear was that the role of the person was simple: to express their will and preference. But the role of the supporter, that was the thing that was amenable to change. So that was the thing that we could work with. So what we could see from the data is that the role of a supporter was to respond to that will and preference. But importantly, we broke up that responsiveness into three very clear parts. So the first part was to acknowledge that person's will and preference. It sounds really simple, but it's not. Anyone who spent any time in an institution will know that people who communicate informally or unintentionally are often ignored. They're often, particularly if they're not the squeaky wheel. So acknowledge their will and preference, and then interpret that will and preference. Now that was tricky. It's very, very tricky. And so what we saw was the most valuable way of doing that was collaboratively, as a group. So when that circle of support came together, watched loads and loads of videos, argued, said, no, I don't think he's happy there. I don't think he's telling us that he's got a headache. So lots and lots of debate. But that collaboration was really key. And then acting on the preference. The acting on the preference was the simple part. And then what we looked at was this what we were interested in is seeing if that role of supporter is so important, we wanted to look at what factors underlied that responsiveness. What were the factors that really helped someone become a good responsive supporter? And the one that I'm very quickly going to talk about in my few minutes left is this idea of relational closeness. And it's come up a little bit. Michael talked about social capital yesterday, this idea that if someone is relationally close to someone, they are more likely to be responsive to their will and preference. It sounds pretty obvious, but sometimes you need to spell it out. So we found that that was the case. A quote I want to share with you just before, this quote is about a young man who died during the process of my study, and this is a quote from his mother, which I just thought was beautiful, because it was around the decisions around what food was served at his wake, so the party that happens after a funeral. And she said, it was everything we all know he wanted, because we know him, love. We've known him all his life. And Dave reminded me, his cousin, he reminded me about the jelly slice that he loved before the peg, so he had a feeding tube inserted, when he was teeny tiny. So we had to have that after, didn't we, with a cuppa? He would have loved it. So knowing his life history, knowing his personal story was really, really important. The other thing then this is what I will finish on, is this idea of seeing a person beyond their disability. Kolbein Ling from Norway did some work many years ago around where he asked supporters of people what if they had complete control over their life, what would it look like? So questions like, if Kevin had control over the stereo in the bus, what would he listen to? And we got some amazing narratives, such rich narrative that gave us a picture of people rather than their disability. Oh yeah, he likes some rock music, like AC/DC, yeah, something with a bit of guts. Yeah, you're right, something with guts, loud, loud, loud. Yeah, louder the better, hey Kev. A deep, heavy bass line, don't you reckon? Nirvana or even maybe Primus. If Nathan had control over his food, what would he eat? He'd be a foodie, I reckon. Foodie is an Australianism for loving food. I think people might understand. Creamy, yummy cheese, flash wine, chocolate, the works. The question I have, though, when we looked at all these narratives was, why the hell isn't he eating yummy cheese and flash wine? He's not. So we were able to use these narratives and really pull out what people's preferences might have been. And that's all I've got to say. So I've stuck to my 15 minutes.